Well, good morning. This is Bishop Elaine. And this morning I want to talk about the book of Esther because today is Purim. And one of the most wonderful stories that I've found is about Esther. I'm going to read some of the scripture in a moment, but I want to just give you an outline basically of what it's about. Well, and it's quite actually, funny enough, it's quite fitting of what's happening today where they've just killed the regime leader in Tehran, in Iran. I don't know what his name is, I can't pronounce it, but everybody is really pleased in Iran, especially the young people, because the establishment, the regime, have been killing thousands of Christians, thousands, and most of them were very young. And these were the people that really believed in Jesus Christ, Yeshua HaMashiach, the Messiah. And the Lord has really been with them. And a lot of the young people have had dreams and visions and all sorts. And, for me, I'm just over the top about it because it shows you that the Lord loves his people and he keeps his promises. Now, the book of Esther there was King Xerxes and in Susa. And one day he had a huge, great big party, and everybody was drinking, getting merry, overdoing the drinking as usual. And also the Queen was having her party. Now, at one point, when the king was quite exuberated, is that what the word? He was very drunk. He wanted his wife to dance, and they say, sorry, they say that he wanted her to dance naked. Well, of course, when she heard this, she was horrified and she refused, and you can't blame her. They did say that she had a very bad attitude towards the king because, the king wanted people to bow and scrape to him and stuff. But what wife would want to dance naked in front of his drunken friends? Well, that was terrible. And so when she said no, um, King Xerxes, the prime minister, and all his colleagues to do with the politics and various things, said, look, if your wife says no to you and you don't do something about it, then all our wives would be expecting, to be able to tell us what we can and can't do. You can't have that. And so he was told to get rid of her and he sent her off packing. But when he woke up and when he wasn't drunk, he was devastated in what he'd actually done. So then I'm not sure whether it was Haman who was a prime minister. He hated the Jews. He was very prominent in this story. But somebody suggested that he should have a great big beauty competition. I wouldn't say they would call it that, but all the girls from his area, which ranged from Ethiopia to India, all these young girls would come and they would be given beauty treatments, made to look better, learn how to speak to the king, and the etiquette of being a queen. And they would be taught by the eunuchs, and then after a while, the king would sleep with each girl, and whoever he chose would be the queen. Now, in Susa, there was a young girl called Hadassah. Hadassah was a Jewish girl who'd lost her mother and father, and Mordecai, who was her uncle, brought her up as his own child. And when he heard of this, he was dreading it, and he was telling Hadassah not to tell them her name because he didn't want them to know she was Jewish. And he said, call yourself Esther. And then one day, the guards came and collected her. And the thing is, it wasn't this wonderful beauty competition as a whole. There'd be many girls who were very young, and they'd be frightened, and they'd be leaving their mother and father for the first time, and it was horrendous, really. gathering up all these young women. Anyway, she went off to the palace and had all these beauty treatments and shown how, but she did have her own special way, really, because she was a very nice young girl. It's all right, the plugs come out the computer. So, yes, she was a very nice girl, very, very beautiful, but wise and educated. And when I watched the film, she helped some of the other girls who were frightened, who were terrified and were crying themselves to sleep at night. She really was helping them to cope in that very difficult situation. So it came to her night. And, in reality, if he's sleeping with all these girls, you kind of wonder if he had any sexual transmitted disease. But it came to her night, and he saw that she was very different to the others. And she picked a rose, and he said, "Why did you pick the rose?" He says, "Because I like it. I love roses." And she spoke to him. She had a conversation with him, and he liked that because he could actually talk to her, and she knew what she was talking about. Whereas a lot of these other girls are all, silly gigglers and really not well versed in things, or I don't know whether she had a good education or whether it was Mordecai that had taught her many things, but she was very quiet, humble, and those characteristics is what he was looking for, and somebody to have a conversation with. And so he claimed her to be the queen. And it must have been a shock for Mordecai. But God makes a way where there's no way. God uses her, as what we're going to talk about in a moment. Nothing is by accident. And she was brought in as his wife for such a time as this. Now, when she was queen, Mordecai would go into the courts as well, and people would tell him things. And one day he was told that two of the king's men were going to murder him. And so he went to Esther, and Esther told him that Mordecai had said this. And they executed those two men who were going to kill the king. And they wrote it in the annals. But the king didn't really take much notice at the time, because I'm sure he got that much else to do, to be honest. He was really jam-packed with problems and issues. He didn't take much notice. Now, Haman, I don't know how, but he was a descendant of King Agag. If you remember, the Lord told the Israelites to kill, is it the Amalek people, to kill the children, the animals, the king, everything, destroy everything, because they were very anti-Jewish, and I'm not sure if they had the giant, what do you call them, the Nephilim. They didn't have the whole group of people were very much anti-Jewish, and I don't know quite whether they were related to who, what, or why. And Saul didn't kill the king. It was I think it was Samuel who killed the king, because Saul refused and didn't slaughter the animals. He thought that he could have them as the animals as a gift to make his own people more wealthy. He refused to be obedient to God. And in the end, Saul and Jonathan were killed because of their rebellion. They were killed in battle. And so I don't know how it was. It was through the rebellion of Saul that he had come from he'd come from those people. And Haman hated the Jews, and he hated Mordecai because Mordecai wouldn't bow down, because in the Bible and in the Word, God had told his people not to bow down to any other God but me, or any other person but me. And that's what happened. He refused to bow down to Haman, which really got on his nerves. And so Haman decided that he wanted the complete Jewish population between Ethiopia and India, which was the land which King Xerxes ruled over. He wanted to annihilate them, and especially Mordecai. So he made a decree. He went to the king and told him that he wanted these people to be destroyed because of blah, blah, blah. So, of course, King Xerxes signed the seal on the paper, and once he's done that, even he couldn't stop it. And so it went round the gossip. People found out listening into the conversations, or people tell people, and it came to the ears of Mordecai that Haman wanted to annihilate the Jewish people. So he went in sackcloth and ashes and crying to the Lord, and the Jews were crying to the Lord, and he spoke to Esther, which is where I'm going to read the Bible, because I love the book of Esther. I think it's so powerful, and how God was just so amazing in the sense. I'm just trying to find out where it is. Where is the book of Esther? It's not. Let me have a look in here. I do know, but my brain doesn't work tremendously well. So Esther's before Job, so it's got to be here. After the book of Nehemiah. The book of Esther. So we come to chapter 4. When Mordecai learned all that had happened, he tore his clothes and put on sackcloth and ashes, and went out into the midst of the city. He cried out with a loud and bitter cry. He went as far as the front of the king's gate, and no one might enter the king's gate clothed with sackcloth. And in every province where the king's command and decree arrived, there was a great mourning among the Jews, with fasting, weeping, wailing, and many lay in sackcloth and ashes. So Esther's maids and eunuchs came and told her, and the queen was deeply distressed. And then she sent garments to clothe Mordecai and take his sackcloth away from him, but he would not accept. Then Esther called Hathach, one of the king's eunuchs whom he had appointed to attend her, and she gave him a command concerning Mordecai, to learn what and why this was. So Hathach went out to Mordecai in the city square and was in front of the king's gate, and Mordecai told him all that had happened to him and the sum of money that Haman had promised to pay into the king's treasury. Everything's always to do with money, isn't it? To destroy the Jews, decree for their destruction, which was given at Shushan, that he might show it to Esther and explain to her, and that he might command her to go to the king to make supplication to him and plead before him for her people. So Hathach returned and told Esther the words of Mordecai. Then Esther spoke to Hathach and gave him a command for Mordecai. All the king's servants and people of the king's providence know that any man or woman who goes into the inner court to the king, who has been called, he has but one law: put all to death, except the one to whom the king holds out the golden scepter, that he may live. Yet I myself have not been called to go to the king for 30 days. So they told Mordecai Esther's words. And Mordecai told them to answer Esther. Do not think in your heart that you will escape in the king's palace any more than all the other Jews. For if you remain quietly or completely silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place, but you and your father's house will perish. Yet who knows whether you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this? And then Esther told them to reply to Mordecai, go gather all the Jews who are present in Shushan and fast for me. Neither eat nor drink for 3 days, night or day. My maids and I will fast likewise, and so I will go to the king, which is against the law, and I will perish. If I perish, I perish. So Mordecai went his way and did according to all that Esther had commanded. So her and her court and other people were fasting and praying for 3 days. I think were they just praying? I can't remember, they were praying and fasting. And praying, perhaps. No, they weren't praying. They were fasting for 3 days. I knew there was something I read because the thing is, it was very significant that they were fasting and getting closer to God, but it doesn't mention prayer. But whether or not they prayed, we don't really know, but it doesn't matter. The fact is, we're fasting for 3 days and really pleading to God for his mercy for the Jewish people. So after the third day, she went before the king, and remember that Vashti, the wife that he had told her to go, because to him she was very rude to him. I mean, today's women would think what she did was correct, but in those days you didn't treat your husbands like that, especially the king. So anyway, she went to see the king with her head down, being very humble, of being respecting him, and he loved that. So he put out the scepter, which means that not to kill her, and she asked him what it was that she wanted, and she said that she wanted to have a banquet for him and Haman, and he thought that was a fantastic idea. So when it came to lunchtime, what we call lunchtime in our life, she put on a beautiful, beautiful banquet. But she said she didn't say what it was, but asked him to come back the following day. Well, I think that during this time that Haman built a big gallows where he wanted to hang Mordecai. So this was going on in the background. And that evening before the following day's banquet, he couldn't sleep. The king could not sleep. And so he asked for his personal aide to come and read him from the annals so that he might sleep. And just before, anything else, the king's assistant read out the annals about Haman, not Haman, about Mordecai, how he'd saved the king's life. He found out that two of his own people were going to kill him. And then because there's nothing else going on, he wasn't a busy person, he was concentrating on what the man said. It dawned on him what Mordecai had done. And so anyway, Haman arrived and he said to Haman, if somebody saved your life and was really great to you, how would you treat them? And of course, he thought that the king meant him. And he said, well, he'd get a donkey and he'd put him on the donkey and take him around the whole of Susa, where the palace is and all around, and everybody would clap and praise him. And then he said, right, I want you to go and get a donkey for Mordecai and take him round the city because he saved my life. Well, he was gobsmacked, he was furious. And so he had to take the man who he despised, who wouldn't bow down to him, who was Jewish, and he had to take him round the village on a donkey. Well, that's God's sense of humour. He does have a sense of humour all the time. He's very funny. I mean, even when he gets cross with me, he always makes fun of it in a nice way. So he tells you off, but he's also humorous so that you don't get upset and you understand, why he's cross with you. Not all the time like that, but he is. He's got a good sense of humour as God, and the Lord Yeshua is very funny. And so anyway, they went to the following banquets, him and Haman, him, King and Haman. And at the end, she said, well, what is it you want me to do? And she said, um, my people are going to perish. They're going to die as I am. And he says, what on earth are you talking about? He says, Haman's put out a decree to kill all the Jews, and I'm Jewish. And he was horrified because remember, he couldn't do anything about it. Once he put his seal onto the paper that, this animal, he was sent around all from it's a long way, Ethiopia to India. And it was a massive thing. And he was furious. So he kind of walked off in a strop, and Haman got on his knees and saying he's really sorry, he didn't realize, blah, blah, blah. And when the king turned round, he thought that he was trying to get off with his wife. I mean, perhaps I shouldn't say them in those words. And so actually um, he hung Haman on the gallows. Haman was going to hang Mordecai, but they turned out that it was Haman that was killed. And his 10 sons were killed, I believe, in battle. So he made Mordecai, the king made Mordecai the prime minister. That's right, his plugs come out again. He made him the prime minister. And there was Esther and Mordecai were putting their heads together and praying, how could we stop this from happening? And so now that Mordecai was a prime minister, he sent word to all the Jews, preparing them for what's going to happen, which actually saved many Jewish lives because they were able to protect themselves rather than just suddenly them turning up and killing them all. They could protect themselves and, plan things and whatever. But there was a great war, and many of the Iranians, because it was Babylon, many of them died and many of the Jewish died, but there would have been all the Jewish dead had Haman had his way. But the Lord had other plans, and he used Esther and Mordecai and the king, because the king could go for the decree to tell the Jews what's going to happen. And that's why I think it's an amazing thing that this all that's going on in Iran is happening now. This is the time of Purim, the time of remember the book of Esther and her saving God's people. And, the Iranians, Babylonians, Iran, Babylon, all around there was Assyria. There's two things here. One, the Lord is bringing everything out at the moment. Whatever's bad is spewing out, and people are learning about stuff. And so we've had all of this with the royalty. And now we have this with the Iranian, because the Ayatollah, can't think of what his name is. I couldn't say it anyway. I'm not very good at those words. But he's dead, and obviously they've got they're sending off missiles and rockets and still kicking off and whatever. But this guy is dead thanks to Donald Trump and Netanyahu. You see, and Donald Trump for me is just being used so much for such a time as this. He's not an evil man. He's a man of justice. And they say, oh, well, he's not a Christian, but you don't know what he is. And even if he's not, he's doing God's work. But I believe he's got an awareness of who Jesus is. I do, because of what he's been doing and how he's very much, for putting Christianity in schools. And he was the only person that made an effort to show Nigeria they can't kill all those Christians. And so all this is happening with Iran, Iranian, people are coming to Christ. God has used people like Donald Trump and Netanyahu to stand up to these tyrannical people, and they've been killed. So this is so important today, because what happened then is happening now. There's so much happening, it's unbelievable. But God is the God of justice. You cannot mock God. And so you read the book of Esther, and how many chapters are there? It's not very long. It's chapter up to 10 chapters, but there's only a few pages. And I suggest you go and read the book of Esther for yourself. I mean, it's too long really to read it all now and to go into everything, but it was so significant. And then when Mordecai said, if you don't save your people, then you will die, and God will send somebody else, and that really she was born for such a time as this. So that is my little Bible study for today, and praise God, it's Purim. Bye.